Dave Ramsey is one of the most famous finance gurus in the world, with millions of followers and hundreds of millions of dollars. So clearly, a lot of people like his advice. But despite his popularity, he's also controversial. So if you give me just a few minutes, I'll explain Dave Ramsey's 3 most controversial pieces of advice, why following some of Dave Ramsey's advice will provably make you more poor, and why some people should follow Dave Ramsey's advice anyway, but only if you are terrible with money. And if you're new here, I'm Charles. I have a job in the tech industry and work as a financial coach in my spare time. And for about the past year, I've been writing the Fire Friday newsletter to help more people reach financial freedom and retire early. And for a video about Dave Ramsey, it's only fair to start with one of his most iconic claims, which is that you should have 0 debt. Dave Ramsey is so completely against having debt that he thinks that nobody should have a credit card, even though 82% of Americans do, including me. So let's quickly break down the pros and cons of Dave Ramsey's advice and why I don't follow this advice myself. The reason that Dave Ramsey gives this advice is debt is super dangerous. Debt is keeping a lot of people super broke. And the reason that debt is so dangerous is it accelerates over time. Whenever you're in debt, you have interest payments. And if you can't keep up with the interest payments, then you have more debt and even bigger interest payments. That is a super vicious cycle. So if you have $10,000 of credit card debt at a 20% interest, that will increase to almost $62,000 after just 10 years. And that's assuming you don't build up even more debt in the meantime. If you're going $1,000 extra into debt every single year, then you'd have $87,000 worth of debt. That debt will only become more and more expensive and grow faster and faster, which is why it's extremely dangerous to go into debt. So I don't hate this advice from Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is right that debt keeps a lot of people broke. If you won't make the monthly payments on your credit card, or you'll use debt to buy things that you couldn't really afford, then following Dave Ramsey's advice might be really smart. But the reason that Dave Ramsey's advice is so controversial is that debt and credit cards can also be extremely powerful tools for building wealth. Let's start with credit cards. If you pay off your balance every single month, you won't go into debt at all. That means you'll get all of the benefits of using a credit card, like free points, cashback, and a credit history, without any of the downsides of having debt. So as long as you make this monthly payment, the only real risk of having a credit card is that it will trick you into spending even more money than you would have otherwise. If you go on expensive vacations just because you have free airline miles, then you're probably going to lose money. But as long as you only buy things that you really were going to buy whether you had a credit card or not, then a credit card can make a lot of sense. So it really is just all about discipline. And you need to sit down with yourself and be really honest about whether your credit card is a good investment. If you're using your credit card to spend more money than you would otherwise, then it's probably a good idea to follow Dave Ramsey's advice. But credit cards are not the only way to go into debt. And Dave Ramsey tells people to have no debt if possible, even on a house. And this advice is really controversial, and that's because it could actually lose you money. And let me show you why. Let's say you have $10,000 of debt, which you pay 3% interest on. You could pay off this debt this year, and you'd save yourself $300 in interest payments. But what if you didn't pay that debt off, and instead you invested it and earned a 10% return on your money? If you did that, you would make an extra $1,000 from investment returns. You would have to pay off your $300 of interest payments, but that's still a $700 profit. If you knew that you could earn a 10% return on your investment, then that's a better decision than paying off your debt. Of course, this is just a toy example, but it does show something that's super important. As long as your interest payment is low enough on that debt, then you really could make more money by not paying it off. So do I follow Dave Ramsey's advice on debt? Well, yes and no. I do happen to be completely debt-free, and the only time I ever plan on going into debt is if I buy a house, which I haven't yet. But I do use a credit card because I know that I'm very disciplined with my money. But as much as Dave Ramsey encourages people to go with 0 debt, the truth is a lot of people are already in debt. And that brings us to the second piece of super controversial Dave Ramsey advice. Because if you pay off your debt the way that Dave Ramsey recommends, you will be more poor than you could have been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I explain why this advice from Dave Ramsey will make you more poor, let me first explain what this advice is and why Dave Ramsey gives this advice anyway. Dave Ramsey recommends paying off your debt using the debt snowball method, which his website very confidently describes as the fastest way to pay off debt. And this strategy is extremely simple. Just pay off your smallest debts first. So if you owe $1,000 on one credit card, $5,000 on another credit card, $10,000 on your car, and $100,000 on your house, you would pay off your debt in that order, no matter what the interest rates are. And the reason that Dave Ramsey recommends this approach is it helps you get an easy win. The thinking goes that once you pay off one source of debt, you'll be more confident to tackle your finances. Eventually, you'll become an unstoppable debt-crushing force, at least according to Dave Ramsey. But there's just one problem with this advice, which is that it will make you more poor, at least compared to some other strategies. That's what makes this advice from Dave Ramsey so controversial. The debt snowball method is not the fastest way to pay off your debt, and I can prove it. Let's say you owe $5,000 on one account that charges 5% interest, $10,000 on another account that charges 10% interest, and $15,000 on a third account that charges 15% interest. And to make things simple, let's say you have $5,000 that you can use to pay off debt. Dave Ramsey would tell you to pay off the smallest account first, which you could completely pay off. After 1 year, you would owe $11,000 on one account and $17,125 on the other, for a total of $28,125 of debt. But a faster way to pay off debt is to pay off your highest interest debt first, which is charging you 15%. You could reduce that account to $10,000. So after 1 year, you would owe $5,250 on the smallest account, $11,000 on the second account, and $11,500 on the third account. That's $27,750 of debt, which is less than $28,125 of debt that you would have if you used Dave Ramsey's approach. So this shows that paying off your highest interest debt first actually saves you more money than Dave Ramsey's approach. And if you do this for years and years, this could add up to a huge difference. Following Dave Ramsey's advice could cost you thousands of dollars. So do I use this advice from Dave Ramsey? Absolutely not. Now, I'm not in debt, so I don't really need to use either of these strategies. But if I was in debt, I would absolutely put all of my extra savings into my highest interest debt first. Now, I do understand the power of finding an easy win, and whenever I work with a coaching client, I do try to find a quick win that will get them excited and motivated. But blindly following Dave Ramsey's advice just to get a quick win could potentially cost you thousands of dollars depending on your specific situation. And to me, that is not worth it. But so far, I haven't even talked about Dave Ramsey's most controversial piece of advice, which I actually think is the most important. Because if you follow Dave Ramsey's advice, you will probably go bankrupt. Let me explain. Dave Ramsey says that you can safely retire with an 8% withdrawal rate.
Right? If you left 3 in there, so that it would grow a little bit to cover some inflation, and pulled off 8, that means you'd be living on $90,000 a year. If you can do that in today's dollars, you can do that in tomorrow's dollars, because if you leave this alone, because it will have grown that much more.
That's right.
All right. And so if you did that, the account is growing by 3% a year if it averages an 11% rate of return.
Also a good point. So you're still getting
so
more money.
So it never burns up. It runs in perpetuation.
An 8% withdrawal rate means that you could retire as soon as you have 12.5 times your annual expenses in retirement savings. So if you spent $40,000 per year, using an 8% withdrawal rate, you could retire as soon as you have $500,000 in retirement savings. The reason that Dave Ramsey gives this advice is because the stock market has returned more than 8% per year on average. So as long as the stock market returns more than 8% per year, you can safely withdraw 8% of your retirement portfolio without your net worth going to zero. Seems safe, right? But there's a big problem with this piece of advice, which is that it doesn't actually work, or at least it's extremely risky. And there are 2 reasons that Dave Ramsey's advice is so dangerous. The first is inflation. Once you factor in inflation, the stock market has really only returned about 7% per year. But even withdrawing 7% per year would still be way too risky. And that's because the stock market is extremely unpredictable. So even though the stock market goes up by 7% per year on average, you really want to withdraw less than that just in case there are big stock market dips early in your retirement. And there has actually been a lot of very good research on this exact topic. And what the research has found is that a withdrawal rate of 3.5% to 4% is what is actually safe. Withdrawing 8%, like Dave Ramsey recommends, results in bankruptcy over 50% of the time. So in other words, if you follow Dave Ramsey's advice, you will most likely end up bankrupt in retirement. And that's why this Dave Ramsey advice is so controversial. There is very well established evidence that Dave Ramsey's advice is wrong and extremely dangerous, but he's never admitted it. So am I following Dave Ramsey's advice? Again, absolutely not. I will save at least twice as much money as Dave Ramsey recommends before considering retirement, and probably even more money than that. Retiring with an 8% withdrawal rate is completely unrealistic. And if you want to know more about this topic, I actually made an entire video about why a 4% withdrawal rate is a lot safer. But here's the thing. Even though I completely disagree with a lot of Dave Ramsey's advice, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to him. A lot of people actually should. The real reason that Dave Ramsey is so controversial is he's speaking to a specific audience. His target audience is people who are terrible with money. And it turns out that's a lot of people. And Dave Ramsey's advice has clearly worked for a lot of people. And that's because you really don't have to be perfect with your money. A lot of people need motivation and hope more than anything else. And Dave Ramsey has been that for millions of people. But I'm making videos for a completely different audience because I'm just trying to help people retire early. And if you want to retire early, then Dave Ramsey's advice probably is not the best for you. But if you do want to retire early, then I am super excited to help you on that journey. And the best place to start is by fixing the common money habits that keep most people broke. So to help you fix those habits, I made this video right here, where I talk about 8 super common money habits that keep a lot of people broke, and of course, how to fix them.